like we said, this is our pilot year, so we want to include everyone. I was hoping when I stopped sharing that my camera would work again, but I haven't unlocked that secret just yet. So, Jenny, anything you'd like to share?
Oh, do we have questions in the chat? Nope.
Right now, nope.
Any questions from the group?
I have a quick question. I think we talked on the phone this week.
Oh yeah, hi Becky.
Hi Jenny, it's Becky. I didn't know if anybody else, we just had a meeting this afternoon. I didn't know if anybody else had advice for, especially in all of the examples here, and maybe it's more of just a note for your staff. I live in a really rural town, and so almost all of the examples I'm finding in the plans you've done before, in the suggested literature, everything is very, very urban. And I'm having a hard time applying it to what we have here in Moundridge. We were just looking at sort of like walking routes for our planned activities, and even just finding ways to draw those up. How do you write up kind of teaching points for our leaders of those walking routes, and for our teachers who are talking about this and getting people geared up? It's been really hard to find resources that look anything like our town. So it's just kind of a note for your staff that like a lot of the Kansas communities look really different than where your design staff live. And so living into that, it's just a challenge for me to translate it. So just a note for your staff to think about when you use examples or give suggestions.
Yeah, and I know we talked about that and how like what a big deal that I do feel like the tool staff will be sensitive in the planning process. But one thing I'm going to just drop in the chat, as part of the active transportation planning process, we did develop a toolkit that is, it's a planning toolkit specific to smaller communities. And there's like a mapping tool on there, and it's actually works best if you're like a pretty small, like in terms of, 1 to 2 square miles in a town, because otherwise it would be too cumbersome, right, to use some of these tools. So if you want to go ahead and take a look at that, like in the background and everything should apply more to the smaller to mid-sized communities. But yes, I've been hearing that ever since we've been working on active transportation. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I'd add to that, Becky, thanks for that question. First of all, I think it's really important because a lot of, and especially when you think a lot of this, of the Safe Routes to School plans, it shows these infrastructure improvements on like a grid network or, something that doesn't exist as much in rural communities. And I know in a lot of rural communities, so I live in Wisconsin, which is mostly rural communities. And, it's like the school is way out someplace, and then everybody else are like miles away. And so in a lot of those cases, when you think of Safe Routes to School strategies, it's more about either culture change in the school, or like you mentioned, toolkits, thinking about like, okay, so what does a walking school bus leader, like what is that role for our community? And I would encourage you to think about that maybe as more of like a Kickstart grant versus a planning grant. That if there's those kind of like one-off things that you wanted to dig into a little bit more, that Kickstart might be a good avenue for you to go.
And I agree, Becky, and I'm happy now that I can actually join the Zoom. But what I would tell you is, when I talked about the advisory council and I said geography all over the state. So that's why we would welcome comments from the smallest community out to the largest, because the Safe Routes to School plan is only valuable to your community if it matches your community, right? So like Sarah said, I think the Kickstart grant is a way for you to have a little budget to kind of kick that off, get started. So I would encourage you to apply for that one. Okay, Sarah and Jenny, do you have any questions from yesterday's webinar or anything that you'd like from our PDF that you'd like to share? That sometimes inspires questions.
Sure, I have a couple, but Adam, I see that you unmuted, so I wanted to let you.
Yeah, I had a question. I'm in the middle, as Jenny could tell you, of a TA project, and we looped the school into our TA project. I think that was a 2019 award in 2020. Yes. So we're going to be going to Ladding in 24, but we still had more. When you're looking at the planning and the kickstart, is that something we can use coinciding with, you know, a TA project in the future?
For sure. Yes. So that's the main, like for us, like when we look at applications for transportation alternatives, we always want to see a plan where whatever you're identifying for construction is on that plan. Because otherwise it's not really planning, it's kind of willy-nilly routes based on a resident or business or something. So showing that the community has had public engagement and that these are the priority routes and why it's important. And so as these in what communities are you thinking about for, or just generally?
Well, we started it down, you know, basically from our high-speed zone all the way to the school zone through our community, but we still had 4 or 5 additional phases, you know, to try and bring them all to the location of the school.
Yeah, but what I missed what community that is that you're talking about.
Oh, Frontenac.
Frontenac. Okay. Yes. Yeah. So, right. So you're already working. So yeah, that's the beauty of these plans. And, hopefully as part of the planning process, communities can identify like what those barriers are. So like in Mound Ridge, where Becky's from, they have railroad, issues to deal with, that hopefully the consultant like can help the community think through those things too. Did I answer your question?
I think so. Yeah.
Help me, Jenny. So good. Okay. Okay. Is there any questions from yesterday that you have there?
Yeah, so one of the questions that is just important to note, I think, is that you can apply for both the planning and a Kickstart grant. So if you feel like, you know, you want to plan, but there's also something more immediate that you want to try out or do, feel free to apply for both. Just a note as you do that. So the application, it's kind of an online survey sort of method of doing it. And one of the first questions is, you know, are you applying for a planning grant or are you applying for a Kickstart grant? And then the questions after that will be different depending on which grant you applied for. So if you're doing both, you'll just have to do 2 applications. You won't be able to do them in the same application. But we do encourage you if you would like to go for both planning and Kickstart.
Because one definitely, I mean, they definitely complement the other, you know, it gives you a start and then you can dive deeper into the plan.
Yeah.
And Jenny, do you want to share with us any kind of a timeline that you were thinking on these grants? I think we discussed that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I did want to kind of elaborate on the Kickstart. It's definitely for communities where you feel like you need more buy-in. You don't have the buy-in. There's the skepticism, you know, around walking and biking to school. And so hopefully that'll help. And then also we just wanted to have like an opportunity to participate, do something fun in your community, to start increasing awareness of safe routes to school. In terms of a timeline, you know, the application's due November 17th, and we hope to get those reviewed and awards announced by, you know, around the end of the year, early next year, so around the new year, and hope to then complete, like if you are awarded for a planning grant, then we hope to have that complete within a year. So like the consultants would get to work, you know, in that next semester. So like the January through May timeline, ideally when it gets a little warmer is a good time to see where the kids are walking, those patterns of kids walking and biking. But then having time in the summer and possibly beyond to build those reports, present it to city council, the school board, for approval.
Okay, so that's a pretty fast timeline, you know, for some action, right? I think so. Excellent. Okay. And so I know sometimes with me, when I actually figure out how to do everything on the screen, I'll think, gosh, why didn't I ask that important question for everyone to share? So feel free to share information with us and we can add it to our question and answer place on the website, right? So any question that you have, probably other communities have that same question.
I have one that's come to mind as you're talking. We've had multiple gatherings trying to figure out, we're going to do some just fun Friday walks and try to encourage people to walk to school. And we want to have some leaders to help that feel safe. I wondered if anyone who has either done it or from your committee has suggestions, because we're running into this idea that, like, if parents send their kids to a meeting place in the morning, we pretty much assume that's permission for their kids to walk with our responsible leaders, but we haven't done any kind of like a form or a buy-in. It's if you're there at the meeting place, you walk with us. But school pickup seems to be a bigger challenge. This idea of like releasing a child to someone without the parent there doesn't feel like something that we want to or have the ability to take on without like a huge organizational permission. Who's on my list? Who am I picking up? And I wondered if anybody had jumped through those hoops before and had suggestions for ways to make that work. Right now, we've just said for the Friday ones we're planning, we're just going to do them in the morning and we're just going to get kids to school. But it to me, it leaves a missing piece.
Yeah, and I know Sarah can probably talk about it more because she has a lot of background. Like what I've heard is that oftentimes that's why you only have like walking to school, because the after school schedules and you know, activities can make it a little more complicated. But Sarah, you can talk about like that. It is possible, hopefully.
It is possible. It's funny you mentioned that, Becky. Some of those pictures that I showed were from our work in Montana doing safe routes to school, and this was an issue that came up there. And there were kind of two takeaways. One was, at least in the schools there, the whole idea of like, okay, you need to make eye contact with a child's caregiver before you release the kid. That it was grade dependent there, but it wasn't like on the books. It was more like second grade and below, and then after third grade, you just assume they're going to be okay. I guess I have a fourth grader and a second grader, and sometimes I would trust the second grader a little bit more, but yeah, teach their own. And so part of it was like, okay, so those younger grades are really the ones where it's more the permission. And so one of the policies, actually, when I showed you those policy and programmatic recommendations, there was one of the actions was revising that school policy or figuring out what needed to change. And when working with the school district there, they do at the beginning of the year, they send out a form, and this isn't all the schools, this is just some of the schools in the school district, send out a form saying like who will be there at pickup, or how does your child get home from school. And that's a pretty regular thing that schools send, because sometimes it's like they get on the bus, they walk, they bike, somebody picks them up. But to basically just have another row that's like on Friday, they're part of the walking school bus. But like you've probably realized, you know, school administration has a lot of other things on their plate, and like adding this to it is really hard, especially once the school year changes. And so this is a great place to use, you know, Tool Design has been doing safe routes to school all over the country for 20 years. And so we can bring like, we've already done this is what they're doing in this school district. So it's like a ready to use template for you all instead of starting from scratch. So yeah, we're happy to work with that. That seems like another great kickstart thing, not only like, let's work on changing this policy, but also if it's just like training or materials for those walking school leaders, is this like get everybody vests or a t-shirt that says something, you know, like those little things that make it more of a fun program and give it some stability and, you know, a look of it's official. That's something that would be a great kickstart project.
Agree. And Becky, I want to add to that because I had those same questions, you know, since I've just been on the job a couple of months, I wanted to see it in action. So earlier this week, I went to Kansas City, Kansas, where they hold a walking Wednesday. And so I wanted to walk with them to see how it really worked. And it was so neat to see in motion, or yeah, to see in action, because like Sarah said, they had a clipboard. So that was only walk to school. That wasn't pickup. So they had vests that said they glow, glowy vests. And the teachers started at the school, met at the mural. They called the students by name. They'd say, oh, there's Johnny's mom, or they're dropping off, everybody to the side. And then as we walked through the neighborhood, parents were sitting like on the stoop or something, and the kids would come out. It was very like community feel, right? So then when we got to the school, the principal was waiting. So when other students were being dropped off, she greeted the walkers. It was like very much positive experience, right? And then next week, I don't know if you're participating, but it's National Walk, Bike, and Roll to School Day on October 4th. So in their community, when you talked about leaders and things, so we invited the mayor's office, we invited the Rosedale Community Association, we got teachers, 3 Kansas City Kansas police are walking. One of them is riding his official bike and stuff. So I think a good thing for you to do, if the Kickstart grant works for you, that would be kind of a fun way to invite like your mayor or something. You're in Mound Ridge, right? I think that's what they said. So, and I'm from a small town too. So then I think a lot of those people like to support the schools. So that would be a fun kickoff way. And so so if you want to do a fun Friday, I'll be happy to drive there and walk with you too to see your operation. And so
we can't, well, the 4th isn't a Friday, but we're starting it on the 6th. And I laugh because if you're from a small town, you'll get that like our football quarterback lives in one of the neighborhoods. And we're like, dude, we should just start all our walks there, because the kids from the south neighborhood will come to the north just so they can walk to school with Henry. Like, so yes, we're trying to get those people on board.
It is the Friday night thing.
He'll be in his jersey. It's homecoming Friday. Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. And that's why I encourage, another part of our program is temporary. So Jenny, temporary fixtures, can that be part of the Kickstart? I can't remember. But like is that right, Sarah? Okay. So if you wanted, say you had a turn that all the high school kids flow right through or something, and you wanted to put out like some curb extensions or something. And so what I talked to Jared, he's our MPO person here, and what I said was, how you would get schools on board to do in a small town, a small project like that? You paint the school colors. If you could get the logo, that would be a shrine, So anyway, all right. So I'm going to keep your October 6th event in mind. And I'm sending, I think, some safety tips to you today too. So.
And I did want to emphasize what Becky talked about, how she identified this quarterback as being popular and the kids kind of idolize him. That is like every community has something kind of special like that, and being able to kind of identify what that is, I think is great. So you're already a step ahead. Sure.
Yeah.
You get here. Is it Henry? If you get him to agree.
Yeah. It's like it's like Willie the Wildcat. I mean, he's like a celeb. People see him walking around. So anyway, it sounds like you're on the right track. And I think that starting with even a Friday morning, you can branch out from that too. So, and I'll share what I saw with you. Okay.
Any other questions, comments? Well, we thought no one showed up because it was noon on Friday, and here you are almost 3 o'clock on a Friday sticking around. So
excellent.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I apologize for all the technical difficulties because that's never smooth. So okay, so please share information, questions, anything with us, even comments on the webpage, anything, because we're building this with your help. So excellent. Okay, everyone. If there isn't anything else, I think we're gonna get ready for Friday afternoon. How's that? Okay, thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.